Hello, my name is Chrissy Hodges, and I'm going live tonight to talk about a topic that, of course, you might think, why would we talk about that? And of course, my thought process is, why wouldn't we talk about this? Because I like to talk about the difficult things when it comes to sexual intrusive thoughts with pure O, violent intrusive thoughts, all of those things. I am Chrissy Hodges, a peer support specialist, OCD resource consultant, and the author of Pure OCD, The Invisible Side of Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. It is a dreary Thursday night, so I thought to myself, what better topic than to talk about sexual intrusive thoughts and your libido? Why? Because this is such a huge topic, as it should be if you're experiencing these types of thoughts. So many people have a decreased libido when they are having these really terrifying thoughts that they don't want, that are intrusive, that are unwanted. And so what happens is that feeds the thoughts, and it also feeds into the idea of, what if I never get better? What if I'm never going to be the person that I was before this showed up? What if I'm never going to enjoy sex again? What if I'm never going to be able to have sex again with my partner because of this? How am I going to tell my partner? And then it all just explodes, right? So there's a couple things I wanted to cover here. So I have a little list here to make sure that I hit them all. First of all, I always, when I hear this from people, and I also experienced it as well because I live with sexual intrusive thoughts, even though I also had scrupulosity, so I was all worried if I made out with anybody or anything that God would punish me and then the thoughts would get worse, and that's a whole other video. But I did worry at times when I was having an increased sexual intrusive thoughts, when I was having the groinal syndrome, things like that. I was worried if I'm making out with someone, what if I'm going to get some image pop into my head and that means something? Of course, I experienced that decreased libido. And that also spiraled me into, oh no, that must mean that this is real and I'm never going to be the same. And it was really, really scary for me, as it is for so many people that live with this. Oftentimes people will say that they feel neutered if they've been living with this for a long time. They don't even feel like they ever have any sexual attraction anymore to anything other than what their sexual intrusive thoughts are. So that's even scarier. But the natural way of being attracted to who they're with or who they're attracted to really does diminish. So I just want to talk about, from a peer perspective, just talk about it a little bit with a few points that I'm hoping that can normalize when this is happening to you. So the first is, and I had to kind of learn this for myself, why would you think that you would have a libido if you are thinking these really horrendous, horrible thoughts? I mean, obviously that's the last thing that we want to go in our lives, but that is going to be one of the first things to go when we're having disturbing images, when we're having disturbing thoughts, and especially if we're having if we're having a physical response to those thoughts. It is scary stuff. And so along the same lines with that, I want to say this. When you are sick and you are dealing with an illness, and let's just go the simplest possible, not that it's simple to a lot of people, but, well, no, we'll go the simplest. You have an everyday cold. Okay? You have a sore throat, a runny nose, you're hacking all over the place. I mean, do you really want to have sex? Okay, well, maybe some of you do, but maybe your partner doesn't want to have sex with you, especially if they have germ contamination. Anyway, let's go a little bit higher than that. Let's look at the flu. Okay, so your body aches, you're having a fever, you're having all this stuff. You know it's going to be like 5 or 6 days until you feel better. I mean, really? Is that really what you want to do? And maybe you do again. So I'm not going to go down that road every time with you, but it's kind of a natural thing to lose that desire and lose that libido to want to do something because you feel like shit. I mean, that is just the bottom line, right? So I don't want to have sex because I have a fever and I feel like holy hell. And so naturally, that's what's going to happen. But oftentimes, we don't associate what we're dealing with an illness. Why? Because it feels so real, number one. And number two, sometimes it's just hard to realize that an actual illness can affect these things in our life in this part of our brain. So, making that assumption can be really difficult and can spiral down into that area of, well, that just must mean this, which of course, as we know, our compulsions, as we know, keeps us stuck in the cycle. So one of the things I really try to remember, and I try to encourage or remind clients that I'm working with when they're feeling this way, is you are suffering with an illness. And with any illness, there are some things that are just naturally going to go. You know, sometimes it's the desire to exercise or the desire to socialize because you don't feel well. And a lot of times the desire to have sex or be intimate with your partner. So a little self-love and compassion, those things just come with having an illness. And OCD is a debilitating illness. And maybe sometimes you just need that reminder. The next is the guilt and the shame of the thoughts. So this can also affect whether or not you're wanting to be intimate with somebody, whether or not you think about your future with somebody, or the idea of having sex later in life. I mean, you think to yourself, I'm having these horrific thoughts that I hate, that are unwanted, that I'm terrified of, that sometimes feel so real. What if they are real? How am I going to convince the person I fall in love with that they aren't real, that this is just a manifestation of an illness? And all of that also can get wrapped up. And of course, the first thing that we go to is the guilt and the shame, right? And the embarrassment. What if they believe that the thoughts are real? Then I have to worry about that. And how can I get intimate with someone if they know all this stuff? Well, I'm going to start by saying, remember, I always say this. It's your story to tell. No one ever has to know what you go through or what you experience with an illness that you did not ask for or that you did not bring on yourself. So number one, it's your story to tell. But processing that guilt and that shame and embarrassment, yes, so many of us go through that. And yes, it does affect our ability to get intimate with a partner. It just does. It doesn't for everybody, but for a lot of us, it does. And when you are dealing with these heavy feelings of shame and guilt, all of a sudden you can also feel not worthy, and it can bring up a whole lot of other things that go down all of that rabbit hole. Again, those can turn into compulsions, but also there are things that you can do to help with that. Talking to a peer support specialist, someone who's been through it like myself. Talking to a professional about doing some EMDR, which is the trauma work that you might want to do because of what you've been through with OCD, because it is traumatic. And that trauma can end up affecting the things that you really loved at some point and you want to really enjoy again later down the line. Part of what I wanted to bring that up is that if you're feeling that way, you are not alone. And if you are feeling like that kind of stuff is affecting the level of guilt and the amount of guilt and shame that you're experiencing, trust me, this is something that so many of us live with, and it takes a long time, maybe with a professional, maybe with a peer support specialist, or whatever you need to do to work through that. But it is possible to come to terms with that and to move past it. So another big point, and hello, all of you are going to know this. Oh my gosh, I don't want to, my libido has gone down. I don't want to have sex. I don't want to make out, because what if the images and the fears pop up in the middle of doing it? I mean, that is the worst case scenario, right? That is what we do not want. And actually we'll start avoiding intimacy because we're too afraid that it's actually going to happen, right? I mean, the last thing that you want is, if you're experiencing, like incest thoughts, is to orgasm and all of a sudden, your dad pops in your mind and you're just like, I don't know what to do now. Like, what do I do? Do I enjoy it or do I not? What do I do? And you have that long to decide. Anyway, Dad, that's not about you, by the way. But I'm just using it as an example of this is something that we are so terrified. We're terrified of having the thoughts anyway, but then we think about being in a vulnerable situation like that. Oh, and then and then the whole thing is ruined. And then you have to explain, well, I didn't really enjoy it because of X, Y, and Z, or you don't want to explain it, you just want to geek out. And then your partner gets mad at you because they think that you're just doing it and leaving. So it could cause a lot of commotion. But again, understanding that these are real reasons why you may be avoiding intimacy, you may be avoiding sex, your actually libido is going to decrease because of these fears coming up, which are natural fears, by the way. We're already so worried it's going to happen anywhere. That is probably one of the most vulnerable places that it could. So just so you know, you're not alone in this. So there are probably so many other reasons and so many other things that contribute to why, when you are living with sexual intrusive thoughts or even violent intrusive thoughts, any of these thoughts that create the shame and guilt, blasphemous intrusive thoughts, I probably should address that. Like the whole scrupulosity piece, if you're worried about if you're doing something bad, and that can absolutely fall in line, is sex right or wrong, or is making out right or wrong, or is this pleasure right or wrong? And then all of a sudden you end up obsessing about whether it's right or wrong versus does it feel good or not. So this is how OCD infiltrates the bedroom. I feel like I'm a sex ed teacher right now, which I'm not trying to be. I just want to drive home the point that there's so many reasons why this can be affected, but what happens is that we get so narrowly focused on, if I don't have a libido, if sex isn't pleasurable, that must mean something's true. That must mean the thoughts are real. So for fear of giving reassurance, when it comes to ERP, I don't want to say that it is or it isn't. However, it is not uncommon for people, when they're living with this type of illness, with these types of intrusive thoughts, to experience this, and what I have commonly heard people say, to feel neutered. I can only talk about my lived experience, and this is a little embarrassing, but I actually had an aversion to all of that when I was a teenager and into my 20s, because I was afraid if I did something wrong, I had scrupulosity, that God would punish me with the bad thoughts. And sex is something that, in my viewpoint, became wrong. And so I didn't do that, and I had a lot of really mixed, awful thoughts about it. And all were, uneducated and not correct when it comes to all that. But as I went through treatment, as I was able to work through recovery, and also, especially, and I want to drive this home, come to terms with the guilt and the shame and the embarrassment of living with this type of OCD, meaning sexual, violent, intrusive thoughts, blasphemous, intrusive thoughts. Once I came to terms to that, yes, I was able to develop my sexuality, my sex life, whatever. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but it became something that before was something that was shameful and embarrassing and guilty, and I was so worried about everything, to where it was enjoyable. So I can tell you my own personal experience, absolutely. It is something that, yes, can be affected, but also can return, and it can be great. So the bottom line is, like any illness, and like I said before, if you are in the middle of an illness, you are likely to not be like, hey, let's go to the bedroom. I've got 103 fever, but let's get it on. Like, that's just not how it works. And OCD is a chronic, debilitating illness. And if you're in the middle of symptoms, it's okay to feel like that isn't something that you want to do. It does not say something about who you are or who you could be at some point, and that enjoyment won't come back. It's like any illness. Once you get the proper treatment, you learn to manage it, and you're living in a day-to-day life where this illness isn't consuming you. Yes, it is possible to have a great libido, a great sex life, and to be intimate with the people that you love. So with that, I'm going to click off. My name is Chrissy. If you're interested in peer support, which is normalizing and supporting not only the symptoms, but the emotional turmoil of living with OCD, by using my lived experience. Or if you're looking for referrals or resources in your area, or those that can do online therapy across state lines, please email me at ocd.chrissy@yahoo.com or gmail.com, or visit me at chrissyhodges.com. And if you're interested in my book, it's Pure OCD, The Invisible Side of Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, at Amazon. Thank you for being here. I hope that I lightened up your dreary Thursday night. Actually, have a happy Easter this weekend, and I will see you soon.